Hey everyone. So in this video, we're going to look at some more monetary policy questions, helping you answer questions for your SAC and your exam. This is a past exam question, actually from last year's VCAR exam, and it was done really poorly. So let's have a look at it, and it will help us move into probably a more relevant question for the monetary policy SAC. It says, with reference to 1AD and 1AS factor, explain why the Reserve Bank forecast in 2021 for unemployment was inaccurate. So what are the factors in the economy that actually made the unemployment rate lower than the RBA predicted, that made the RBA look silly? So this question, you need to think about 1AD, 1AS factor that actually led to the unemployment rate being lower. So it cannot be theoretical, it has to be contemporary. And as I said, students didn't do well in this question, and I think that highlighted their lack of knowledge around the contemporary economy. So what's going on in the economy currently on the demand and on the supply side. Well, just a little shout out to MCK Economics page. Speaking of the supply side, their productivity is huge, but I thought this was kind of relevant because the RBA is trying to keep inflation in check while, what's the budget doing? So how are we going to mark this question? 2 marks for the AS factor, 2 marks for the AD factor, and then 1 mark for bringing it all back together and saying, these two things, this AD and AS factor, led to the unemployment rate being lower than the RBA thought it would be. Okay, this is straight from VCAR. This is their sample answer. You can go and have a look at it. So this student just says that consumer confidence was a lot higher than they expected, right? Because remember, at the time we were coming out of a pandemic and the RBA predicted everyone to be really pessimistic and to slow spending, but actually the opposite occurred. More spending means more derived demand for labour from increased AD, and therefore lowering the unemployment rate below their forecast. On the supply side, they used the exchange rate. The exchange rate actually appreciated over that time, and that meant that importing businesses were able to buy stuff overseas a lot cheaper, allowing them to grow and create jobs. So that would decrease the unemployment rate. You could use any AD, any AS factor. I probably wouldn't have chosen the exchange rate, but why not? You can use productivity, wages growth, anything at all. Okay, let's do a much more relevant question to monetary policy, because of course this is not only unit 4 monetary policy, but it's also unit 3 outcome 2. That's where the dot point sits that says you need to know contemporary AD and AS factors. But it does help us in thinking about the focus of monetary policy. So let's try this question. Explain how 2 contemporary factors led to a change in the RBA's monetary policy stance during 2022. So this will be much more relevant to you because you should be thinking about 2022, not 2021. And of course, the RBA is doing something different this year. So same marking guide. It doesn't have to be AD and AS, but I could make it a little bit harder and say 1 AD, 1 AS. But 2 marks for correctly outlining and explaining 2 factors, and then linking that to how these factors would have made the RBA tighten monetary policy over 2022. So their stance is now less expansionary, very close to contractionary, depending on how you look at it. Okay, but tightening definitely. Okay, so 1 contemporary factor. I'm going to use the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Okay, that was a supply shock. You could use the COVID supply shock in China. They're still trying to pursue zero COVID, which is really hurting some of the supply chains. Another factor I use is the tight labour market. You could use the depreciation of the Australian dollar, which is stimulating growth. You could use strong business confidence, strong consumer confidence, any factor at all. And I'm saying these factors, along with other inflationary forces, led the RBA to, well, we already know because I just said it. Okay, so let's flesh this out a little bit. Let's make this a little bit more meaty. So we obviously need to explain this. So the supply shock, the first factor, caused the price of gas and fuel and petrol and other energy sources to rise. Okay, now those things, believe me, I've just paid my energy bill. Those things show up in the CPI on the demand side. Well, not necessarily on the demand side, sorry, they just show up in the CPI. But they also show up in cost of production for firms, because lots of firms use electricity and gas and petrol in their production. So their cost of production rise, and that would be passed on as well. So definitely inflationary. So that would be a supply factor. Another factor is the tightening of the labour market. Well, the RBA is always talking about this. So over 2022, the unemployment rate dropped to a 50-year low. And the RBA is concerned that this will create wages growth. So also a supply factor. I've chosen 2 supply factors. So the idea is that wages growth, will create more inflationary pressure, and that will make the RBA more concerned with high inflation. And that's exactly what happened. So these factors led to the RBA to tighten monetary policy, raising the cash rate from 0.1% to 1.85%. Okay, it's a less expansionary stance. Now, we can still probably do more. I think you should pause and just think, what can we add to this to sort of beef this up, just to put a little bit of flavor on top of this to really stand out? All right, so what I've done is I've just shown up the top, so back to the first factor, that fuel and electricity are inputs in the production for many different goods and services. So the reason some of our grocery items have gone up in price is because of the supply shock and the increase in the price of petrol. Okay, so I've just stepped it out. Talking about the tight labour market, well, I've actually said, well, the unemployment rate is at 3.4%, so that's well below the NAIRU. That should have a percent there. And I've said that consumers are going to bid up the price of goods and services, and cost of production will be passed on by firms. And then finally, I've just said, well, they're going to ease inflationary pressures by slowing the growth in aggregate demand. Probably didn't need all those things, but just to give you an idea of how you can really stand out in your writing. All right, bye for now.